welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Katie, I'm a mixed media artist, but one of the mediums that I've never tried before is acrylic gouache. If you saw my Japan haul last week and some of my recent videos, you'll know I recently went to Japan and I bought some Holbein acrylic gouache. So Holbein is Japanese made, so it was a lot cheaper out there compared to when I buy it here. And I'm really excited to give it a go. It's not a medium that I've ever used or experimented with, so this is going to be a video where I test it out. I'm going to do some swatching in my sketchbook and then I'll finish with a landscape piece. As I swatch, I'll talk about how it feels, the consistency, and I'm also going to compare it to just acrylic paint and traditional gouache. Those are the paints that I generally use, so I'm keen to see how this sits in the middle. I'll be talking about the comparisons and really seeing what makes this paint so different. So I need to stop rambling and get on with the video because I think this is going to be quite a long one. But do let me know if you love acrylic gouache and how you use it down below in the comments, because I am a complete noob. So let's get into the video. So these are all of the colours that I bought. These are all Holbein acrylic gouache paint. I feel like I got a really good range. I've obviously got the pastel set here at the bottom, and then I picked a few other colours which are different to the ones in this set, but still sort of pastel vibes, and I feel like they're really good for landscape, so I specifically tried to pick this colour palette to match my work. So I'm going to start by swatching these in my sketchbook. I'm actually going to be using a Pith sketchbook today. So this is the one that I reviewed on the channel recently. And I'm just going to do it on a double page spread. I find that swatching supplies is really helpful not only to see the colours that you've got, but also to practice mixing and experimenting and really see the type of paint that it is. So I will be comparing it to acrylic and gouache as well, but I want to see how this fares, and just putting down swatches is really helpful to see the consistency and how it works with your paintbrush. So I'm just going to go through and swatch them, not necessarily in order, just whichever ones I pick up first. So this first one is called Shell Pink. It feels really nice. It's very thick, definitely feels as thick as gouache. It's definitely more like heavy body than the acrylic paint that I use, which is usually the Amsterdam acrylic paint or the De La Rowney System 3 acrylic paint. So I'm just going to go through. This next one is called Coral Red. It's really bright, so I'm not sure exactly. Oh, I love that colour. I'm not sure how well it will pick up on camera, but that's a really nice, it's kind of like a really nice lobster sort of orange red. And I'm just cleaning my brush in between each of these swatches. Next up we've got Burnt Sienna. So I'm looking forward to sort of using these and seeing how they water down. I definitely think there's a bit more water on my brush here, so it's not coming quite as thick. So that's interesting because I think obviously with gouache it's water soluble, whereas acrylic isn't. So I'm really keen to see how this works, whether it works more like gouache or more like acrylic. Then we've got Sap Green, which is a really nice like deep forest green. Yeah, that's really lovely. It's the kind of green that I use for like my darker tones with like forests and bushes and hedgerows. So far I feel like this is a really nice landscape palette. Obviously this coral pink isn't often seen in landscapes, but I love using pink as my highlight sort of pop of colour at the end. Next we've got Misty Green. Oh, that's lovely. That's a really nice sage green. Usually I use a lot of olive green, so this is slightly different. I'm looking forward to mixing up some greens with the coral red and the Naples yellow, as well as using that sap green as well. Next up we've got Misty Blue. That's a really lovely sky blue. Really nice. It can also be mixed with white, obviously. I didn't buy a white acrylic gouache actually. Maybe that's an issue that I didn't foresee, but I wonder how it would mix with white acrylic paint. And then last up we've got Naples Yellow. Now for me this one looks more yellow than some of the other Naples Yellow I have, so I have this in gouache. And it definitely seems more yellow toned than that one. Oh, that's lovely. I think that there's a good range here, just in terms of these colours that I didn't get in a set. I feel like I'll get a lot of use out of them. And I'll definitely try mixing them up together as well. So I'm going to do that now before I swatch all of the pastel tones. So let's try and swatch a few greens. So I haven't got my palette with me, so I'm just going to do it straight onto the page. So let's mix some of this Misty Blue and some Naples yellow. And I'm thinking this will turn out like the misty green. And I think if I want it more olive, then I might add in some of the coral or the pink. Oh yeah, that's created. Oh, that's a lovely green. So that's, as you can see next to this one, it's definitely more olivey, definitely warmer than that one. That's a cooler toned green. Let's try and mix in some coral as well and see what happens. So they mix really nicely together. I really love the way that they feel and the way that they are mixing. So it does feel like nice and thick. Oh, that's created like a sort of lilac-y brown colour. I don't want to go into like colour theory here, but it's amazing the range that you can get just from a tiny dollop of colour from one to another. So we could do like a whole spectrum here. Let's add in some of this sap green because I don't have a darker tone blue, which would work. I want to try and make this a bit more olivey, so I think with the... Oh, that's created a brown. Let's see, a bit more green. Yes, that's a lovely colour. Really nice. So like even paired with this green here, I think will be really good. So I feel like this is a really nice way to mix up colours. Like I said, learn a little bit more about the medium and how it sort of works together. With these 40ml tubes, I am finding it a little bit more difficult to just get like a small amount out of the tube. Usually with acrylic paint, I'm not too worried. With gouache, I'm definitely a little bit more careful with how much I put out because it is so expensive. So this feels like a very sort of muted palette. It's not super colourful. The coral on its own is probably the most vibrant that I've got here. I'm just going to carry on mixing and just try different things. I'm getting some really nice dusky pink shades and some really nice browns as well. So I think if I pair some of that pink with the misty green, I'm just sort of playing here. I think we'd need a bit more green with what's on my brush. That's really nice. So that just adds a bit more pink to it. They're super smooth when mixing, which is really nice. I feel like blending is really easy with these. Yes, it's super smooth. I love the feeling of this. It does feel like acrylic, but then like the consistency is still quite gouache-like. It's really hard to explain, which isn't very helpful for a review video. Put some more yellow down. So that's kind of like a dirty yellow that I've mixed with what was on my brush. Let's see what happens if I mix the yellow with a bit of burnt sienna. So just a tiny amount of that, just to warm it up. I could also use the coral for that. That's a really nice colour too. That feels like a butter yellow compared to the dirty yellow next to it. And like we can keep going adding more and more and it will become a bit more brown. So I feel like these colours are a really good starting point. I feel like I can make quite a lot of muted shades here, which is definitely very pretty and I think will work really well as landscapes. So I'm going to put you on a time lapse now whilst I swatch all of our pastel shades. Okay, so there are all the swatches, so you can see we've got quite rich colours here on the left, and then over here we've definitely got a lot more pale ones. That made it harder to sort of mix a darker tone. The darkest tone in here is definitely the light magenta, and we've also got horizon blue. It makes sense that those are the darkest because all the other ones generally have got like pale in the name. We've got pale pink, pale peach, we've got ice green, but a lot of them say pale, pale mint, pale aqua, whereas this says light magenta. So I don't know if maybe they don't do a pale magenta, but I thought that was interesting. To me, this kind of stands out the most out of all the other tones here. This one feels a lot deeper. But I did mix up some really nice ones. I love this green here. I think that's a really nice shade. And overall, we've got some really nice warm tones. I mixed a really nice warm grey here as well, which I really like, and a nice pale brown. So I feel like this will be really interesting to use. There's definitely some colours here that are very different to me. This over here on the left is definitely my comfort zone. This will be really good for contrast. So I couldn't get a huge amount of contrast with these. So I feel like I can intermix these with this one and get a whole new palette. So that was really interesting. I really enjoyed mixing them up. I love the consistency of this acrylic gouache. It's really lovely to work with. So I'm going to compare them with acrylic and gouache now for you, and then we'll create a piece using the acrylic gouache. Okay, so I've got some other supplies out. So I've got some Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache. So that's the traditional gouache that is water soluble. The Amsterdam acrylic paint. So this is by Royal Talens. This is just standard series acrylic paint. And I'm going to put down the Holbein acrylic gouache as well. I want to see how they feel, how they compare, and then I'm also going to layer. So I've got my Neo colours and also some coloured pencils to see how they layer on top. So I want to do a light and a dark. So let's start with Ivory White from the Holbein acrylic gouache, and then I'm going to use the sap green as well. So really nice and thick. It spreads out really nicely as well. I also want to try dry, so you can get some really nice textures. And I'm also going to just dip my brush in water and see how that goes. So you can get it really watery like that. And I'll try that with the others as well. So let's do the Amsterdam acrylic. So with acrylic paint, once it's down, it's down. Whereas with gouache, traditional gouache, it can be re-wet. So I might explain that and show you that a little bit later. The light tone is Titanium Buff Light and the dark tone is greyish blue. So again, it's really thick. It does go down really smoothly as well. So I'm going to wipe off my brush and again try and get that dry brush effect. So it's quite similar in that way. Well, my brush is still a little bit wet there. And then I'll wet it as well. And now I'll do traditional gouache. So for the light tone I've got Naples Yellow, so it's a bit darker than the ones above. I'm just going to mix that around. Again, super smooth. I really love the smoothness of this paint. And for the dark tone I've got the Oxide of Chromium. So this has been mixed with quite a bit of water here, so it's probably less thick, but I think that's mostly to do with what's in my tube. I'll just grab another brush and do the dry effect. And with a lot of water as well. And then I'll just label these up. So now I've got these colours down, I want to see how things layer. So I'll just let them dry and then we'll come back. Okay, so first up I want to put some of the same medium on top and I want to show you about the traditional gouache mixing in. So everything's dry now. This is the acrylic gouache on top, so I've labelled it up. And I'm just going to take some of this green, so the darker colour, and I'm just going to put that on top. And I want to see how it sits. So it's sitting absolutely fine. Obviously my brush is a little bit wet, so that's why it's not quite the same shade of green here. This is a lot darker. But I'm going to do the same with the Ivory White over on top of the green. There we go, so that's really nice and thick. And you can see, like, no matter how much I scrub my brush on top, the green's not coming up. It might show through as I sort of water down that Ivory White, but it's not mixing in. Oh, it is mixing in. Oh, that's interesting. Huh. So I thought that because it's acrylic, it doesn't mix in, but clearly that is. So that's not what I expected at all. Voiceover editing Katie here. So at this point in the video and going forward, I did think that it was going to be reactivated. I was a little bit confused, but the reason is because it wasn't completely dried. So up until it's completely dried and it's still wet, you can use it like gouache, but when it's completely dry, you can't, and that's when it acts like acrylic paint. So I just wanted to come in and make that really clear. I do also come in on the video when I've realised it and test it on my swatch page, and if you want to see that, that is on the timestamp on screen now. But I just want to add this caveat in because going forward I do reference it quite a lot. I don't know everything. This is the first time I was using this material, so I think that's really important as artists that we do experiment and try new things. It just so happens that I put mine on the internet. Okay, on with the rest of the video. I presumed it was more like acrylic in that it wouldn't pick up what was underneath, so this is just acrylic paint, so I'm using the Amsterdam again. Mix that on. It's just sort of diluting. It's still the same blue on my brush. And we'll do that with the titanium buff light as well on the blue. So if I mix that on top and then come here, yes, there. So you can see there how I can't get any of this acrylic paint up, whereas it did up here, and I thought that this was more like acrylic, but that seems more like gouache. I wonder if it takes a longer time to dry. I'm sure those who have used this a lot more know a lot more than I do, just testing it out now, but let me see. If I put water on top of this, can I reactivate it? Only slightly. I wonder if the longer I leave it, the more it will set. So if I do that on the acrylic, can I get any blue? No, it's just water, so that's completely set. I can't get any colour off that. Whereas when I try it with the gouache at the bottom, let's see how that fares. Okay, so again, I'll grab my green, and I'm just going to place that on top. Oh, that was quite watery. And you can see it's mixing in, so I'm mixing the yellow into this. And we'll do the same on the dark green like with the others. So this is the Naples yellow. I'll do it quite thick and then mix it in. And you can see there that it's picking up a lot of pigment. Can you see that on my brush? So where I've mixed that in, I can get really nice feathering, but it's picking up a lot more colour. So let's try that just with water. So you can see that I can reactivate this. This paper probably isn't the best for this, but you can see I can pick up pigment. And the same with the yellow. I can pick that colour up, whereas I can't do that on the acrylic. It's not coming up with any colour, it's just coming back with the water. Let me, before I fill up this whole page with paint, I want to see how things layer. Let's try some Neocolor. So these are the Neocolor 2s which are water soluble. I just want to see how it lays on top. And with my white as well. So it layers really nicely. If I then apply some water on top of this, I think it will mix into both. Let's try that. Let's do a bit more white and see. Also, so it must be a little bit wet there. And that's picking up more green. So if I did that on the acrylic, it won't do that. So again, I've got my blue. They both layer really nicely. It's just like putting Neocolor on top of a smooth surface, so there's no issues with that at all. Let's try the white. And some blue there as well. And I'll use the same wet paintbrush. And it's just mixing the Neocolor on top, so there's a barrier between the paint below. And this one, again, I'm just getting white on top, so it's not mixing with the blue. And then last up, we've got the traditional gouache. So I would say that the Neocolor is layering on top just fine. Again, very, very smooth. There's the white, so it's showing up better obviously because the yellow is darker. But when I wet my brush, it's going to mix in with the colour below. So you can see there, it's made a yellow. And when I mix the white here, it's going to make a pale green. let's do that up at the top again. So I keep coming back to this acrylic gouache. Let's try the green and see if it mixes in with the ivory white. Yep, it's definitely coming back up. I mean, I'm a complete novice with this, so this has been really interesting and really helpful to see how it reacts. We're running out of room, but let's just grab some coloured pencils. I mean, I don't think there'll be any issues here. Sometimes I do find that acrylic is quite shiny, and that can mean sometimes things can't layer. So the pink there on the darker isn't really showing at all. It is on the acrylic paint, and then we've got the gouache. I know that the traditional gouache and pencils pair really nicely. Really interesting up here, it's taken away a lot of the colour, so you wouldn't know that was pink, whereas on the lighter colour it's fine, but on the green you wouldn't really know that it was that pink. That's really interesting, that lighter colours sort of change on top of that. Maybe it would be similar with a dark acrylic. But this is all really helpful, and I find like just playing with supplies like this teaches me a lot. So again, with the yellow, it's not showing the colour, so to me that seems more like acrylic. That's really interesting and definitely changes the way that I might use them. So that's why I would suggest like playing around in your sketchbook first. We'll do it on the acrylic. Ah yes, there's a good example. So you can see the yellow changes tone depending on the white and also on the acrylics. Again, that's because it's a light colour going on a dark colour, but I was surprised by just how much it takes out the colour on that acrylic gouache. And then absolutely fine on the lighter traditional gouache. Again, it does change it on the dark green, but again that's because it is light on dark, but you can still see a lot more of the pigment compared to the acrylic gouache. So definitely helpful to see that. Really interesting that it does come back up. I'm going to continue trying that. I'm going to see in a couple of days if it does come back up or if maybe it just takes longer to set. Okay, so I'm back to the swatch page just to test that. I want to see that this isn't water soluble. I've done some research and it isn't. So this colour isn't coming up. So basically I have found that the longer it has to dry, the less water soluble it is. If it's still a little bit wet, then it can be activated with water. If it's completely dry, then it does act like acrylic paint. This is just water coming off here, and I do think like the longer it dries, the less I'll be able to get anything up. This is more like acrylic now that it's completely dry, but it is interesting that if it's not completely dry, you can still reactivate it. So I thought this was dry when I was testing it, but it wasn't. But I think now that it is completely dry, I won't be able to get anything up. No, I can't get anything up, it's just water. So that's really good to know. I was right, it does act like acrylic gouache. I did just want to add this in at the end there. It just needs to dry completely before you then put water on top. Now I'm going to do a painting just using acrylic gouache. So I'll put a voiceover on top and sum up my thoughts. So now we're on to the painting part of the video. I'm again using my Pierce sketchbook just on the next page from all of my swatches, and I want to share a summary and round up the differences between acrylic gouache and traditional gouache as well as acrylic paint. So just to mention what I am painting, this is from a photo that I took last summer. This is actually in Wiltshire, so I wanted to create a pretty sort of landscape piece, and I thought that the colours that I had would work really well with this view. As you can see, I'm putting down my base of acrylic gouache here. I'm just placing this straight onto the page. It didn't have any issues with the paper, and I really like mixing straight onto my artwork rather than using a palette. I think one of the things that I need to learn is how much paint to use. If you are squeezing onto a palette first, I think it can be difficult to know. This medium is more expensive than acrylic paint, but it's less expensive than gouache. With gouache, I find that because I can reactivate it, it doesn't matter how much I put on my palette, because I'll know I'll use it. Whereas with this one, you have to be a bit more careful because it will dry and you won't be able to use it again. So that's just something to think about if you are starting using acrylic gouache. Especially if you are used to traditional gouache, I think just working in that way is totally different. So something to think about. And I feel like if you're not careful, you will get through these paints quite quickly. So as I said, I want to do a sort of a summary as I show you my process here and mix up all my paints. And I definitely think this is a middle ground between both acrylic and traditional gouache. Obviously it's in the name, but I would say that it was definitely a learning curve this whole video, as you've seen, because I was confused about it reactivating. Definitely learned a lot just by experimenting, and I hope that you found this video helpful if you want to start using this medium. And if you are a pro, unlike me, then hopefully it's not being too embarrassing to watch. But I would say that when it's wet, I've definitely learned it acts like gouache, which I wasn't really expecting. I was kind of expecting it to just be more like acrylic, but it was interesting that when it's wet, it can be reactivated, so you can remove it and things can be fixed a lot easier than if you are just using acrylic paint. So I think that's definitely a plus point, but obviously when it dries, it acts like acrylic. So when it's dry, it's completely set. So I feel like this would be great for base layers. I think I can mix traditional gouache on top of this, so if I use acrylic gouache, it would work really well as a base layer, and then I can come in on top with my traditional gouache. It kind of opens up a lot of different layering options, and I feel like that's quite interesting to play around with my art and really just experiment more with technique. So like I said, when it is dry, it's completely set, as we saw with my little intermission bit from when I was confused when I was doing the swatches. But it also means that because it is sort of plastic based, it's not water based like traditional gouache, you can use it on many different surfaces. So if you did want to experiment on things like wood, then this would be a better option than traditional gouache. The colour range is also a really big positive. I feel like in Hokkaido, where I visited in Japan, the options were huge. I think that there is a really big range here in the UK, I'm not sure elsewhere. And obviously I'm only talking about the Holbein acrylic gouache here because I haven't tested the other ones. But I was really impressed with the shade range. There were loads of different colours. I am really happy with the ones that I got. As you saw at the beginning, I could mix some really rich, vibrant shades, as well as having my pastel set. And for all of them, the opacity is really impressive. You can see here that I'm applying it quite thick. So I think that's another learning curve for me, is learning how much water to use. I tended to use this more like acrylic paint rather than gouache, because with gouache I tend to use more washes, whereas this one was definitely a thicker sort of viscosity, and so I used less water as a result. And it means that with layering you can put things on top of other things and not have it show through. So I think that's a positive, and I definitely found it was a better opacity than just using the acrylic paint I usually use. It does dry matte, so I found that really helpful, especially as a mixed media artist. I can layer things on top. Sometimes with acrylic paint it's a little bit plasticky or sometimes a bit shiny, and that means that it doesn't work as well. One thing that I did want to mention is also the pencils that you saw me layer on top earlier. I'd really love to know your thoughts here, because I was a little bit disappointed with how they showed on top of the colour, especially the lighter ones. That was quite a surprise. So if you've used acrylic gouache before, I'd love to know if it's just the pencils I was using or why the colours weren't showing as vibrant as they would if I was using traditional gouache. I was expecting them to lay better and show their colour better because they are matte, but it just took away a lot of the colour for like the yellow that you saw, and that wasn't quite what I was expecting. But here you can see I'm using my dark green on top, and that worked fine, as well as my neo colours. So for this piece it wasn't an issue, but if I wanted to maybe put a white on top of something, I think that's something I need to test out and think about. So I think that's everything that I wanted to say. I hope you found this video helpful and enjoyed seeing my process. I'm just coming to the end points here, but a huge thank you for watching. As I said, I am a complete novice with this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts down below if you're a bit more of a seasoned pro with acrylic gouache. A huge thank you to my patrons for all of their support. Without them, I wouldn't be able to regularly upload as much as I do on my YouTube channel, so a big thank you to them. Thank you for watching, I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!